We produce way more PhD students than we have jobs for in academia. There's a moral obligation to ensure that the kinds of skills we're developing are not limited, that we're setting up people for success beyond the academy.
Hello, and welcome to the Impact podcast series by UAN. My name is Balzhano Razbaeva, Manager Strategic Initiatives, and I'm your host for today. In this episode, Wade Kelly, Senior Lecturer at Deakin University's Research and Development Academy, joins us to explore what it really means to be impactful in academia today. Wade unpacks lived realities of early career researchers, navigating short-term contracts, high workloads, and the pressure to engage with communities, often without the right support. Wade shares honest reflections and practical ideas on how universities can better equip their researchers to create meaningful, lasting impact. Welcome to the UAN podcast. In today's episode, we will be diving into a question at the heart of modern academia. What does it really mean to be an impactful academic? For many researchers, the ideal of creating meaningful societal change sits alongside very real pressures. For example, short-term contracts, very heavy workloads, and often very complicated responsibilities that come with engaging communities. And to help us unpack this, we're joined today by Wade Kelly, Senior Lecturer at Deakin University's Research and Development Academy. Hi, Wade. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, Balzan. Thanks for having me.
Yes, thanks. It's very exciting because drawing on Wade's very deep experience in community engagement and researcher support, today we're looking to reflect on Wade's lived realities of doing impact work, the ethical tensions behind impact agendas, and why sustainable responsible practices matter, especially for early career stage researchers trying to find their path in academia. And this conversation touches directly on the themes that are very central to the work that we do at UAN as well, through our Impactful Researchers program, for example, or our support and external engagement and our ongoing efforts to equip academics with the mindset, frameworks, and skills needed to thrive beyond academia. We see firsthand how researchers are navigating these very challenging and often shifting expectations. So, Wade, thanks so much for joining us. We're certainly looking forward to listening to your perspective, as I'm sure it will add a very valuable layer of honesty and lived experience and nuance to this important discussion. I might as well just jump right straight into it. And maybe you can also, of course, tell us a little bit about yourself. But how did you come to this work and impact, and what keeps you here?
Degree in education, and then I went to do a master's degree in adult education. And when I finished that degree, I ended up being bored. And so I started this local event called the Nerd Night Edmonton, which is like Discovery Channel with beer. It's 3 nerdy talks in a bar. And then I got an offer to come to Australia and do a PhD, and I didn't really know what I wanted to study, but I thought it was an interesting opportunity. And I chatted with a colleague at the University of Alberta, and she said, study the phenomenon of the thing that you care about, not the thing that you care about. So what's the thing that's really happening there? And what I started thinking about was, why do academics say yes when I ask them to come speak to a room full of people who have been drinking in a bar? What was the impulse to say yes? Because they're probably not going to get much out of it other than getting to share their knowledge. And so it started me on this journey of really thinking deeply about what is our connection with knowledge, with community, what is our ethical responsibility to be sharing our knowledge, particularly to communities that maybe we don't always think could find use in that knowledge. And that led me to this idea of research impact. It was bubbling along in the UK and in Australia. And so I was thinking about community engagement and how does that enable impact? And it set me on this journey thinking really deeply about what we do with knowledge and where does it end, where does it die, when should it not die, and what could we do to prevent it from dying? What can we do to prevent the paper that only 3 people read from being the only type of dissemination or the only type of output? And so the impact conversation creates tons of space for us to think about the ways that we critically engage with communities, with industry, with government, to ensure that or to hopefully improve the odds that our knowledge will go into the world in useful ways. And along that line, we've seen a tremendous amount of bubbling up of attention of impact, and it occupies lots of pockets of conversation. But I think one of the really interesting ones that's bubbling up in the last couple of years, particularly post-COVID, is this idea of the kind of social contract or the social license that universities have in society. and including our vice chancellor at Deakin University, has really been talking a lot about we have this moral obligation to do more than just do research and publish it. We have a moral obligation to do good research, ethical research, outstanding research, but then make sure it's mobilized and useful for people who can use it.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. I really like the notion that you mentioned that sometimes it's just also easier to talk to researchers directly with the outside of the realm of academia in a cafe, in a bar, and also just acknowledging some of those very challenging tensions that we're experiencing around impact, what it really even mean,
Mm,
especially in the world where when it's charged with this impact factor driven philosophy. So I really appreciate the work that you do. And I actually would like to ask you about the book that you wrote, because I
sure.
know for many colleagues in research and development work, it actually helped a lot to understand some of the concepts behind it. So do you mind telling us why you wrote this book and what you had in mind? What perhaps are main challenges or questions you were trying to unpack as you went on this journey?
Sure. The book is called The Impactful Academic. It was released a couple years ago by Emerald Publishing. And myself and co-authors look at the impact life cycle and the journey and look at different aspects of what it means to be an impactful academic. So it starts off by thinking about what does it mean to you? Why are you doing this work? What passion are you bringing to this project? What is the thing that you want to accomplish? Why did you become a researcher? Like, this is a thing that we do as a researcher developer in the Research Development Academy at Deakin, is ask that question to graduate researchers. And it's really great because often you get them bubbling up and you ask people what they're passionate about, and all of a sudden the room just explodes with conversation. Because it turns out we all like talking about the things that we like talking about. But then we tend to lose sight of that. We get bogged down in our KPIs and the things that the university tells us we need to do. And not always, but often, possibly too often, academics get consumed by the time restrictions that incredibly busy jobs. The average academic works around 60 hours a week. So if anybody tells you it's an easy job, it's not. It's about 60 hours is the average. There's a couple studies that confirm that. And so you can get bogged down in the minutia of the teaching and the reports and all the things and getting the grants and writing the papers. And sometimes I think we forget that the work that we do can really make a big difference in the world. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about this in the course of the next 22 minutes. But how can that be? How can you get the wheels on the rails or on the bus or whatever metaphor you want to use when you are just starting out in your career, when you have all of these other things these are the factors that are pushing down on you. And so that's what the book really is trying to help people think about themselves, think about the things that you can do now to start building an impact track record, the kinds of engagement activities that can help support that trajectory. And it's available in something like 800 libraries. Your local, if you're an academic staff member listening to this, it's probably in your local library, and give it a read. I get my yearly $58 or $110 or whatever it is. So I'm not making much money from it, but I'm delighted that it's found an audience and that people seem to enjoy it. The last chapter is a really beautiful chapter written by Faith Welsh, and she interviewed various impactful academics and then tells their story, their impact story in the chapter. And I think it's probably my favorite chapter in the book because it's a good reminder that people do have these experiences that we can learn from and draw from. And so within your own academic community, for the people who are listening, or for professional staff who are listening, how are we creating space for academics to talk about their impact journey, to not get too bogged down in the how did you get that grant or where are you publishing, but to really have that more broad conversation around how are you having impact conversations with your partner organizations? How are you doing impact goal setting? How are you making sure that people are aware of what your priorities are aside from where it might be published?
Thanks so much for doing this work because we certainly use your book quite a lot. For the people who are listening, please make sure to check it out. It's very useful. And indeed, I love the storytelling bit of it as well because I think those stories, those impact journeys really help to relate. And I think that's so important to create this feeling of connectedness and just to show some realness of the journey that some other peers may be going through. But speaking of impactful as a term, I would just also like to pause and maybe talk a little bit about that with you. So, how would you describe an impactful academic in the current higher education context?
I really caution people and push back against the idea of getting bogged down in definitions. It's like, how often do we ask people to define research? Well, we don't. People just know what it is and they know what research is for them. You ask a researcher what research is and they often go like, oh, but yet they know exactly what it is and they do it on a day-to-day basis. And so I caution everyone to do not get too hung up on a definition, particularly for impact. Know the definition that you're working with in the context you're working with or in. So if you're in the UK and you're talking about the REF, well, then that's the definition, the Research Excellence Framework. If you're in Australia and you're at a university and you have a local impact strategy, know that one. If you're applying for a grant with a funder, they probably have an impact definition, know that definition. But also, I think it's important for you to talk to yourself about, as a researcher, what does impact look like for you? So I'm a bit meta because I research impact. So it's the impact of impact is challenging. But I would say the fact that we're talking right now and we're having this conversation, that I'm on your radar, that I got invited to do this, means that the work I'm doing is generating some form of an impact. So people are talking about the work, people are inviting me in, that I feel like that's some proof point that through engagement, impact is happening, even if it's a minor impact. And hopefully that impact can grow over time.
The UIIN Conference 2026, where universities, industry, and innovators meet to shape the future. Join us in Stockholm for 3 days of insight, inspiration, and impact. Hear from global thought leaders, expand your network, and be part of the conversations driving collaboration forward. Secure your place now at uiin.org/conference.
I would like to also now to talk a little bit about the early career, because they certainly have very unique context that they are operating in, and the challenges, of course. Everything comes with their own challenges, but perhaps we can talk about how precarity, as well as those short-term contracts, a lot of uncertainty, shaped the way those early career stage researchers think about approach, engagement, as well as impact. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that.
Sure, yeah. And I've touched on it a little bit already, but it's worth expanding on. This is a space that I think requires a lot of deep thinking by institutions, by funding organizations, by leadership within at different levels within the university or research organizations, and for individual academics. Because what's happened is that the impact conversation has percolated and it's gained steam, and now we're seeing all kinds of funders, from international philanthropic funders like the Wellcome Trust, the Asia Development Bank, to local funders in the context of Australia, things like the ARC, the Australian Research Council, National Medical Health Research Group. All kinds are asking for impact. But yet a lot of the drivers for early mid-career researchers tend to be still those kind of the metrics that were used historically and are still being used around how many pubs are you getting out, how many hours you're teaching, what kind of funds are you bringing in. And that's going to be the things that determine you getting to the next stage in your career. So the drivers in the system and the inputs they're not always in alignment. And I think that we're in a tension point right now as a sector, because we're asking people to do one thing, but not necessarily supporting it in the way that you're getting promoted. I've been on hiring committees for academic staff, and they're asking them to write impact statements and demonstrate their impact, but then when they're actually in the role, that goes away. And I see it as problematic, and that didn't happen, by the way, at my current employer, but just to point that out. So what does it look like? If you're an early career researcher, being able to read your local context, be able to say, what are the incentives? What am I being asked to do? What do I need to deliver on to keep my job and to get promoted? But at the same time, being able to read the tea leaves of higher ed and go, what does the future state look like? What are the things I'm going to have to be able to do in 5 years? What are the kinds of wins I can get on the board now? What are the kinds of connections I can start building? What is the network that I'm going to need later? How can I utilize my colleagues as they mentor and support me in my early days within a role? How can I use their knowledge, expertise, and partners and community? How can I be part of that so that I can prepare myself for success later? So these are conversations at the Research Development Academy at my university. We're really thinking about this. How are we preparing and supporting our early career researchers? One of my colleagues, I believe, is in on the call today, because this is a conversation that is really quite alive when we acknowledge that sometimes the promotions don't line up. So this is a big question. We need a lot more research on this as well. There's almost none. And Australia, I don't think, is unique in this space. We want to make sure that our early career researchers are supported and not burned out. And right now, the system hasn't caught up, I would argue. So lots of work to do, thinking to do. And if you're a leader and you're on the call, please take note. How can we do this? So it might be internal funding. It might be schemes that you create that are internal impact schemes for early career academics. It might be engagement funding, so you can send them to the places where they can meet the people, where they can have the conversations that will later on generate the impact. What does the investment in their development look like? What are the skills that they need? Are they able to write for the public? Do they have an academic reputation on LinkedIn? What are the things that we can help to support early career researchers on that trajectory to becoming an impactful academic?
What kind of work do you do to support the Deakin's University Research Development Academy to support them, especially the early career stage researchers?
Well, I think we're pretty unique in the Australian context. We've got a staff of 7 people who are all academic staff, and our job is to develop researchers, particularly around those types of skills that are not disciplinary skills. So things that you're not going to probably be exposed to in your school or your faculty. Things like communicating with the public, things like building an academic profile, developing an academic signature, being able to build a funding track record. These are skills that are really important, but often universities overlook them, or they're just assumed that people will figure it out, right? You set to the wolves, just like, good luck figuring it all out, which can be very challenging. And I think in some cases people are being set up for failure rather than success. So the job of the Research Development Academy is to help set people up for success. And we start at the graduate researcher level. We've got programs for early and mid-career researchers, but then we're also involved in conversations at a higher level, thinking about university strategy. How can we ensure that the policy is reflective of the institutional strategy to make sure that people are doing the kinds of work that we're excited about doing? How can we live by that thing? The Deakin's, in a charter, it says we'll be the most progressive university in Australia. How can we make sure that we keep that in focus and we keep that alive? And so that's part of our jobs as well.
I think it's very remarkable what you're trying to do at Deakin, because I think we also just generally have the obligation towards our academic community, because we should perhaps just stop thinking of academia as a place that can hold all of the academic stuff within it forever. It's just not possible. Therefore, we have to prepare researchers for alternative career paths as well. And I think impact piece is just so big as part of this discussion as well. It's really nice what you do there. Maybe now we can talk a little bit about community engagement as well, because it's, of course, a big part of the work that you do as well, especially in the context of the community engagement for impact framework as well that you've created. So maybe you can tell us how think about good community engagement, so to say, features of different practice that you would encourage. And maybe you can also tell us how you would go about supporting researchers in their community engagement journey.
Sure. I want to, just before I jump to the community engagement piece, I want to echo or emphasize what you've just said about preparing people for different career pathways. We produce way more PhD students than we have jobs for in academia. And so I think there's a moral obligation to ensure that the kinds of skills we're developing are not limited to academic skills, that we're setting up people for success beyond the academy. And a lot of the skills that we talk about, that I see Chin Koo is here on the call, really focus on are thinking about how can a person be set up for success regardless of career trajectory, and how can we help them develop based on what they would like to do in life. And so to connect that to the community engagement piece, how do we ensure that individuals in the academy who want to work with community are set up for success to do that? So as part of my research, I've got something called the CEFI framework, the Community Engagement for Impact framework. And it's a series of questions that universities can ask of themselves, disciplines can ask of themselves, academic associations, and researchers can ask of themselves, to think about the conditions which will allow community engagement to happen in authentic ways, in ethical ways, to surface lived experience, to ensure that the things that we say we do as universities are actually supported by the policies, the programs, and the supports that exist at universities. And I was really heartened, actually. A couple of weeks ago, I got invited to do a keynote for the Environmental Psychology Association in Australia. And that was really their conversation, was thinking about what does the discipline think about doing community engagement and impact work? How could they do a better job of it? How could they signal to people within their community that this is a priority and that this is actually what good scholarship looks like? So I'm really heartened by some of these disciplinary conversations. Also, some of these conversations are happening in universities. Previous to this role, I was the Director of Research Excellence and Impact at Monash University, which is a very large university in Australia. There's like 18,000 staff. And there's 10 faculties, and in a number of the faculties, they are looking at these kinds of programs. There's a centralized incubator fund that also does this work that's really about engagement. It's not about research. You can't apply for funding and do research. It's just to do engagement work, to set up those conditions for the long term, to do impact work.
Planning for impact from the outset and helping researchers engage with their communities early on in the process. Yes, I like that.
Yeah, and acknowledging that people need the time and space and that it has to not be extractive. I had one research participant who talked about how the only reason the hospital allows her to keep on coming back is because they like her. And I've thought about that example often because I do wonder, did they not see the value of the research, which is a bit of a red flag to me, but also that it demonstrates to me that the connection is so important. Right? That they're willing, these very busy people who are running a hospital and have no time at all, because they like the person, because there was a personal relationship there that was invested over a long period of time, they were willing to make the time for her to do that research. And I think that relationships really matter, and we can't lose sight of that.
I totally agree with you. I also often observe another interesting thing happening is that many researchers actually do quite a bit of impactful work without actually acknowledging that they do or realizing that they do. So I also think what we should get better at is to celebrate their success as well.
Yeah.
So and therefore, I really like that, for example, what you talked about before, that it's also important to not just talk to them about impact, but also tell them how they can create their own signature, their own brand, if you like, of an impactful academic. So I think it's also quite important because many, I think, go actually unnoticed, and we should learn how to celebrate them better.
Absolutely. So in the CEFI framework, we talk about that in the university context. What are the stories that we're telling ourselves? How do we signal in the culture of the research environment, how do we signal that this is an important thing, that this is a valued thing and a valuable thing? So one question I always ask Associate Deans Research is, in your research committee, where are you talking about engagement and impact? And often, and I've been at multiple universities, so it's not a current example, but often the answer is we don't. Because the research committee meeting is all about how much money are we getting in from grants, what are the ethical issues, what are the integrity stuff that we're dealing with. And so because it's not front of mind, it's not front of mind because it's not immediate. It's not a thing that's a pressing deadline for. There's no pressing deadline for impact. So we often lose sight of it. But if we can create the space to keep that conversation alive, to keep reminding people in your faculty, in your community, in your school, in your lab, this is a valuable and valued thing. So inviting people to events, to sharing as a supervisor of PhD students, as a senior colleague, bringing your junior colleagues along with you to share, to help build them in that community. I think that is part of the scholarly continuum, part of the scholarly obligation. And some people are amazing at it, and some people maybe just need a bit more work.
Absolutely. I just also have to think a little bit about my own journey when I started PhD 10 years ago. I wish we had the notion of an impactful academic at the time, because it would have been so helpful for me to shape the storyline that I wanted to tell, which then I realize actually now that I have been receiving a lot of support from my supervisors and my colleagues as well. But I think it would have been so much nicer, more helpful, and in many ways even healthier to be able to talk about it from the perspective of an impactful academic, because oftentimes I think it's just at that point, I thought it was very hard to verbalize what is it exactly that we're trying to do with my colleagues. So I really like that we now also have the vocabulary that is so important to have. So for me, it's a positive sign, certainly. And now that we're getting towards the end of our conversations, I actually wanted to ask you as well, where do you see encouraging signs and practices or mindsets that suggests that we're actually moving into a better place. I already added something from myself, so I do think the vocabulary matters, but I would also like to ask you, where do you see those positive signs that things are changing, hopefully for the best?
Well, and hopefully the best. I do think we've got to be very careful in this conversation in the impact space to make sure it doesn't become another metric, another thing that people have to achieve, some empty measures. I hate the term measure, impact measures. So we have to be cautious, and we've got to safeguard it to make sure that the intent of what we're trying to do with impact it's sacrosanct. It's not just a word, that there is an intention behind it that really matters. I will say that when I started this role, I was at La Trobe University as a senior coordinator of research impact, and I would do these workshops, and I would say, what is impact? And the definition was always H-index. And that's not that long ago. Only a few short years ago, the idea of impact was very limited to bibliometrics and citations. And now when I say, what's the definition of impact? I don't even need to do that. The impact literacy, borrowing from David Phipps and Julie Bailey's framework, impact literacy has really increased. And that's really heartening to me. I'm seeing some really positive directions with funders, with philanthropic funders, with academics who are excited. I think you asked what's the promising thing I'm seeing. I'm seeing impact being integrated in really thoughtful ways into graduate research programs. And when we do our orientations and I get to hear the conversations, to me that gets me excited, because regardless if they stay in academia or if they go on an industry trajectory, they're starting to have in focus the passion and the excitement to possibly change the world. And I really do think universities not only do that and have done that, but that we can do it more and we can do it better.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Wade. On this positive note, I think we will bring it to the end, but it was a pleasure to talk to you about impact and impactful academics and researchers. And I look forward to staying in touch. And thanks so much to everyone who are listening. Thank you so much, Wade, for finding time. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. All the best.
Goodbye. Thank you for listening to today's discussion. Follow UIN on LinkedIn, and if you are enjoying our podcast, make sure to subscribe, rate, and review in your podcast platform of choice to help other people find this content too.